I command all those assembled to leave the area immediately.
This is what a Monday night in Seattle has looked like lately. Seattle wasn't home to any of the high-profile police killings that rocked the country this year, but it has been home to some of the most intense demonstrations. In June, protesters took over part of the Capitol Hill neighborhood after police abandoned their precinct. It ended 3 weeks later after 2 black men were shot to death. Then, in November, the city council reduced the police budget for the first time in decades, cutting it by 20%. But 7 months of street action has taken its toll. A majority of residents say they don't support calls to defund the police, and they worry the city is becoming less safe.
This block right here is where all the interaction between SPD and the rioters were. I want my city back.
Victoria Beach is one of them. She's a longtime advocate of police reform, and she runs a citizens advisory group, which brings black residents together with cops to hash out their differences.
What was it like to live here during all
Hell. You know, the constant sound of helicopters, all the time, sirens, them marching, it was just no rest. Our neighborhood was tore up, and I feel like for no good reason.
How do you feel about where things ended up, the 20% reduction?
We have to not defund the police, we need reform, and we need to make the changes together. I've met a lot of great police officers, and I'm not going to shy away in saying that. I feel like some of them are my family.
Are you just an apologist for the cops? Are you just forgiving them for whatever they do wrong?
Hell no. No. I still worry about if I ever get pulled over and see the lights, And I can't fault or blame the community that still hate SPD because I was there once and they're not where I am. And I get it and I understand it and I don't want to take that pain away from them. The police aren't going anywhere. We aren't going anywhere. Let's try to heal.
In fact, police are starting to leave. In part driven by the protests and talk of budget cuts, a record number of cops moved on from the department this year. 130 so far, including the chief, Carmen Best. She was one of the country's only black female commanders. Since then, officers say morale is low. And according to the department, 911 response times have shot up due to staffing shortfalls.
So the East Precinct is right up the street here.
Sergio Garcia was on the front lines during the protests.
What they did was they would have us in this intersection here, just create a barrier.
What was that like for you?
It was crazy, it was intense. The majority of the people were extremely peaceful. But, people would throw stuff, throw rocks. People would throw bottles with urine in it. And I got called homophobic names. I got called racial slurs.
Do you understand where that anger comes from?
Yeah, I do think that there's some sort of valid reaction. People are pissed. But I also think that, you can't compare what's going on here in Seattle to what you see on TV going on in other cities with other police departments, right? So there's this weird place that I'm trapped in where I do understand that, myself, I want more accountability in policing, and I want a better police department in the nation, but I work here, and it's almost a slap in the face to me that people feel that these things are happening here when I'm a person of color and first-generation American, and I don't see it.
You as a human being might be nice, but you represent an entity that is so terrifying to people that can't just be erased just because you happen to be a nice guy.
Yeah, and I think that's when the ball's on our court, right? I think that we need to acknowledge that. But, something you got to also remember is when I hear some of these extreme slogans, like abolish the police, I think that's a very privileged thing to say. It's usually people who struggle with wealth inequalities in this country and in the world who suffer the most at the hands of these services, right? And they're also the people that benefit from it the most.
Of course, SPD has its problems. For much of the last decade, it's been under federal oversight because of its use of force practices. The department has made significant reforms since then. But in 2017, cops shot and killed Charlena Lyles, a pregnant black woman, after she called 911 to report a burglary. The police say she was armed with a knife.
No cops! No prison! Total abolition!
Trayvonna Thompson, who helped lead protests this summer, says incidents like that are why half measures won't be enough.
I have seen so many of my comrades brutalized by them. I've gotten pulled over in the middle of the night by police and shaking scared. Because I don't know if I'm gonna be the next person, what they're gonna lie on me about, what picture they're gonna use when I die on the news.
Did you achieve what you set out to this summer?
I feel like we did hit some milestones, but there's so much more work to do.
One of the voices I've heard is people saying that they felt kind of turned off by the defund message, by the antagonism to the police, that that was too much. Do you worry about alienating people who could potentially be allies?
I'm not completely worried about it because there are allies that are coming to the streets with us every single day. The civil rights movement, we were asking for white people to treat us civilly. And in my generation, we are done asking for the bare minimum. We're asking for you to give us what you owe us. In order for there to be a change in history, there has to be some radical thinkers, some radical movements. And the 20% was just another example of how they're truly not listening to us. I'm tired as a Black person getting small wins.
Protesters like Thompson had hoped the city council would cut the police budget by as much as 50%, something they at one point promised to do. In the end, officials settled for a lower number, while redirecting some of those funds into programs led by social workers and mental health providers. City Council President Lorena Gonzalez says the effort will continue next year, when the police union contract is up for renewal.
Do you consider this outcome to have been an achievement? It seems like everyone's unhappy.
Well, in my line of business, it's politics. When everybody's unhappy, you probably did something right. I would have wanted to see something happen faster and more and be bigger. But at the end of the day, it would be difficult to, in one budget cycle, undo 400 years of institutionalized racism in a police department.
What's the future of the Seattle Police Department in your eyes? What should it look like?
We have asked police to solve homelessness, affordable housing issues, mental health crisis, and substance use issues, and poverty. And that is not the solution. Policing is not the solution to those issues. And so we need to, with the scalpel approach, begin the process of taking those duties and tasks away from the policing system and put them into the proper systems that have been getting defunded for years now. So now it's time to flip that script.
So how did you go from 50% to what ended up with 17 or so percent?
I and so many of my colleagues did make a sincere commitment to want to defund the police department by at least 50%. But as we know, city budgets are very complicated. Police budgets are no exception. And when we got in there, we realized that they had spent most of their budget for the year, and 50% would be hard to do without completely abolishing the police department. And we also came up with a realization of how extraordinarily powerful the police guild or police union is as it relates to protecting the budget and the personnel of the police department. And it's going to take us a while to unravel those things so that we can actually make more deeper reductions to the police budget in the future.
What did end up getting cut from the budget?
What we ended up looking at as a strategy is first and foremost, how can we prevent the police department from continuing to grow? We reduced their hiring budget by about $6.1 million in the form of transferring divisions out of the police department to make them a true civilian function. So it's a combination of cuts and transfers that led to a 20% reduction of the police department's budget.
Does the rhetoric of defund and abolish, does that kind of complicate the picture here?
I do think that it's an oversimplification of a very complex issue. Defund SPD isn't just about defunding. It's about recognizing that there is value in our Black and brown and indigenous neighbors and community members. It's about making sure that we remember that we have underinvested in those same community members to an embarrassing degree.
Is there a danger of defunding the police before these other programs that are supposed to fill that gap, before they're built up fully? Is there a risk to public safety? I mean, the crime is going up in the city, right?
It's important for us to remember that we are dealing with all of this amidst a global pandemic that has created mass historic levels of unemployment and has increased poverty for many people. And so I think that oftentimes results in an increase in crime because people are trying to survive. And we have, as a country and as a city, criminalized being poor. I want to be mindful of that, but I also want to be mindful of the fact that there are victims to serious crimes in our city. And as a city, we have a responsibility to make sure that if they are in crisis, they have a appropriate response to that crisis. Right now, the only model that we have in place is 911. Our police department in 2018 responded to 16,000 crisis-involved calls. They have one mental health professional on their entire team. That's unacceptable and is also not a model that is going to lead to true de-escalation to prevent somebody from dying when they're interacting with law enforcement in the middle of a crisis. It's safe for officers, and it's safe for the people in the streets, and it's safe for the person who's having the crisis to invest more in those crisis response models that are public health tools and not guns. And we have a responsibility to set that system up before we can feel comfortable saying that police officers are never going to respond to anyone in crisis in the future.
What do you think of the lessons for other places about what Seattle's been through this year?
Mm-hmm.
About what it takes to reform the police and what's really possible to do?
Reform is important. Reform is good. And we will need those accountability systems no matter what the size of your police force is. I think there's also sort of just a fundamental need for people in power to really discover what are people really frustrated about. It's not just about the slogan. It's not just about the hashtag. They also have to be willing to acknowledge that change is coming and that change is important. And they can either be a complete roadblock to it, or they can be partners in helping us achieve these changes.
What's the next big fight, the police?
The contract with the police union ends in December. It's going to be a massive fight. And one of the things that is going to be a huge fight is how to do out-of-order layoffs so that it's not last hired, first fired, which is where all of our diverse police officers sit in that category. We're going to have to negotiate some of those issues, likely with the union, but there's a whole host of other issues that we're going to have to negotiate about the body of work and the size of the police department and ongoing budget cuts. And they have a huge amount of influence. They have a large budget, and they are not afraid to engage in grassroots lobbying and spreading misinformation. They haven't behaved like partners to date, but my hope is that we'll be able to get there.